A little bit about me to begin with, and I know Nicola has given you a brief introduction. Certainly, I'm a psychologist. I live and am based in Melbourne, and I own a practice called Livology. Livology is a practice of 3 psychologists, and the name is there because we all have lived experience of a chronic health condition or a disability. So myself and a colleague, Siona, we both live with MS. And another psychologist we work with, her name is Liel, and she lives with a physical disability that she has since birth. And we really are leaning right into the idea that people with lived experience have a lot to offer. So we are primarily psychologists, that's what we do, but we also have these chronic health conditions or disabilities that we live with, and we're beginning to realise that that's actually brings a bit of value to the therapeutic relationship as well. We don't understand what it's like for all of our clients who are living with MS to live with their symptoms. They're unique to them, but we have a bit of an understanding more broadly about some of the psychological issues that can crop up for people when they're diagnosed with MS from that lived experience perspective. And sometimes that can be really helpful. All of my work is done on Zoom. So mostly I get to see the face of the other person that I'm talking to today. That's not the case, but all of our work is done on Zoom with our clients now. I'm also a mum of 2. And I wanted to tell you a little bit more about my MS story so that you can have a greater understanding of that before I go on with the psychology hat on. And I call it the search for a thesis topic because I had finished a science degree and I had, this was when I was 24, 25. I decided, why would I get a job? I'm going to do more study. My parents thought, great. I was still living with them. And I decided to do the doctorate in health psychology. I did move out shortly after that. However, I was looking for a thesis topic. I'd always been interested in the correlation between physical health and psychological health, but I didn't have a specific area that I wanted that to land in order to formulate a thesis topic. And off I go to do this doctorate, which was really very strange, I think, in the way that things happened, because as I was looking for that thesis topic and doing a lot of research and reading about various different health, aspects of health and how I could structure a thesis, I was having coffee at university one day and I felt a very strange sensation in my left leg. And it was really a dullness, very hard to describe. It wasn't numb, it wasn't painful, it was just dull. And I noticed, to cut a very long story short, I noticed this feeling just moving down my left side over the course of a few days. And I found it very odd, but didn't panic because my walking remained fine. There was nothing out of the ordinary. But when this feeling started to go up my left side, I thought, oh, that's really weird, because there was a very clear line down my middle. And even though I am not a medical doctor, I'd done a little bit of biology and physiology, and I thought, oh, that's a very clear left side of the body. I wonder if this is neurological. And I went to the doctor and felt like an absolute hypochondriac because I could feel everything that he, is stabbing me in various parts of my body. I could feel it all, but just not that well. He sent me off to a neurologist who said, yeah, let's run some tests. And I thought maybe it's a virus. And he said, well, we'll do some blood tests and we'll rule that out. And I thought, what else could it be? And I didn't really want to ask him directly because I didn't want to kind of challenge his authority. But I said, is this very common? And he said, well, sometimes we see it. It's more common in young women. And I thought, I'll store that one away and try to figure out what that means, because I didn't know what that meant. And then he gave me the slip for the MRI. And on that slip, it had a little question mark and then a word, demyelination. And I thought, that's a big word, firstly, but I'm sure I've seen it somewhere in a textbook. No Google, people. This was 2001. So sure, Google existed, but not on my computer. And if it existed on my computer, if I knew how to find it, there was not the wealth of information, obviously, that there is today. So I literally went to my science textbook, my first year biology textbook, and I looked up the word demyelination. And it said demyelination occurs most commonly in multiple sclerosis. Multiple sclerosis leads to cognitive impairment, speech difficulties, blindness, and paralysis, I think is what it said. That were the 2 sentences. That's what I was left with. So I, took a moment. And I said to the neurologist before he sent me out of the office with this slip for the MRI, I said to him, when will I come back so you can give me the results? And he said, oh, you don't need to come back. I'll just tell you the results over the phone. And I was like, oh, that was really reassuring, because I thought, well, obviously nothing's wrong with me. Like, this is fine. And he said, unless it's something, more complicated, and then I'll get you to come in. And I was like, great. Okay, great. Phew, felt really relieved. And then, you know what I'm going to say. I called him for the results, and he flicked through a whole lot of paperwork, this paperwork, and he put MRIs up on light boxes, which you have on computers now, but there were big films then. And he said, oh, yes, right, yes, blood test looks good. Yes, on the other end of the phone. Sally, I'm going to get you to come in and have a chat to me about the results. So I knew what was coming. And what came was, I'm sorry to tell you that you have MS, is what he said. And long story short, here are all of the medications that you can choose from. And at that time in 2001, there were 4 injections. And I mean, whether it's 4 injections or 15 different variety of disease-modifying therapies, it's all very overwhelming. And I think the neurologists do such a good job now in really trying to reduce that overwhelm. But by its nature, no matter how it's packaged to people newly diagnosed with MS, it is most typically very overwhelming. What I realized at the time of my diagnosis was that he gave me some great brochures for medications, but what he was missing was a brochure that said, this is how you're going to cope with this diagnosis. That's what I wanted. I wanted a little bit of advice around what am I meant to do with this information? How am I meant to cope with these words that you've given me? And what I felt acutely, which was the uncertainty that this brought to my life. I really felt this real change in my sense of self, who I was, where I was headed, what I was meant to do now, and how other people would view me. So it took a few months, but I realized, that's where I really want to focus my attention. So my thesis ended up being many years later, looking at, I can't even remember the title, but looking at how people newly diagnosed with MS report coping strategies in the first 12 months, what helps them cope and what hindered their coping. I really wanted to be able to produce a brochure that every neurologist could hand to their newly diagnosed patients so that they could feel supported and like they were going to be fine. And of course, in the process of doing this research, I found that no 2 people use exactly the same coping strategies. Everybody's different. So now, as a psychologist, 20-something years later, 23 years later, my job really is to work with people with MS to tap back into the coping strategies they already use, to make sure they're really healthy coping strategies, and to help enhance them when they need to use them with regard to MS or other challenges in their life, whatever comes up. It's probably enough about that. Once again, questions anytime, or if you want to save them to later, we can have questions later. So from the thesis and from the work that I do now and have done with people with MS for a while, I wanted to talk to you about what I now know about people newly diagnosed with MS. And there are 4 big categories, 4 big areas that I think people with MS, when they're newly diagnosed, should attend to. They should give some thought to these categories. You can tell me what you think. Self-identity is a big thing. It's that sudden sense of, I thought I knew who I was, and now I've got this massive label that doesn't feel right. Like the number of times people have said to me, but I never get sick, Sally. I'm not a sick person. So why have I been diagnosed with this massive, what we think of as a massive illness, a massive chronic, incurable health condition? How is that possible when I'm somebody that's never sick? So it's this real kind of confronting piece of information that brings with it a lot of uncertainty. What does this mean for me in my life moving forward? I remember I asked my diagnosing neurologist through floods of tears. I was 25. Even now, I'm not excusing tears. Tears are a good thing in the neurologist's office. But at that time, I was 3 months out from getting married. and planning the wedding, lots of stress going on. And I remember saying to the neurologist, when do you think I will be in a wheelchair? And the neurologist saying, that's not something I can answer, Sally. I'm not sure that will happen, number one. And number two, I couldn't give you a timeline on that. And I thought that maybe he was just trying to make me feel better. This is the first time he's dumped this diagnosis on me. He doesn't want to tell me all the truth of it yet. So later, when I had a second opinion to just make sure that I knew what was going on, they said exactly the same thing. And so what I recognized was happening for me, and in doing some research, figuring out that happens for lots of people, is this sense of grief. And it's a very untangible grief. Nobody has died, but I'm grieving the future I thought I was going to have. And it wasn't even that I had planned a future that now was impossible, but it was grief around the certainty of thinking everything would be fine. I hope that makes sense. So it's this kind of unspoken, it's not like any of us knew what our futures were going to be before this diagnosis, but when you're given a diagnosis, it's almost like somebody saying, well, now you know what it's not going to be. And you don't even know what the things are that are going to be removed from that picture anyway. So it's a whole lot of complicated grief is what I'm saying. And I think that's an important area for people newly diagnosed with MS to just consider that at the moment there could be some grief going on and it's hard to pinpoint what we're grieving. But if it's something to do with your self-identity, that's okay. You're allowed to have those moments. It's a really uncertain time. Communication with others is a key component of things that I like people newly diagnosed with MS to get their head around. And it's around, to be honest, it's around honesty. It's around picking those people in your life who you love and who also love you. So it could be parents, it could be partners, it could be siblings, it could be best friends, and really coming up with a strategy yourself and then involving them in it around how do I communicate with you honestly, because I don't want to be seen to be a whinger and always talking about, oh my gosh, this symptom and that symptom and, you know, my life's harder than yours because I've got MS. I know that everybody in this room does not want to be that person. So many people with MS, I think, make the mistake of saying, I never want to talk about it because I don't want somebody to just see my label of MS. And so I'm never going to say a word about it. I'll just suffer in silence. That is not a great, healthy strategy. So I want you to back it up a little bit if that's what you think is going to be helpful for the people around you. It's not. The most helpful communication style for people with MS moving forward is a sense of realistic honesty, letting people into your world. They can't read your mind. So it's a big one. The people around you that love you and that you love, they can't read your mind. So it's important for you to let them in. And it's hard because I know you don't want to be a whinger. So it's a little bit about how am I going to navigate this so that I'm constantly letting people know how I'm going without coming across like somebody who's complaining. So it's important to have a little think about that. How am I going to manage that communication? The next one, stress management. Stress management. It's important. It's important for all of us. And oh my gosh, we're living in a world where we're constantly bombarded by all of the stimulus all of the time, you know, because of these. This has actually beeped about 15 times since we've started. I haven't looked down though, you'll note. Now I am. See how distracting. So I'm turning it over. But we are so overwhelmed with so many things. So stress management is an important one for all of us. Remember, I'm talking to everybody in the room, but particularly for the people newly diagnosed with MS. So pay a little bit of attention to yourself as you move forward. What are the expectations you put on yourself? Where are your boundaries? We love saying yes to everything. So maybe now's the time to just start practicing respectfully saying no to a few things. And also a big one, asking for help. Practice asking for help now, just in your normal everyday life, MS related or not, so that when a challenge comes up in the future, MS related or not, you'll be able to access the, yes, it's okay for me to ask for help button in your toolbox of strategies to keep you sane. I wish I could see your faces. I hope people are like nodding or thinking this is okay. And then the last one that I think that people newly diagnosed with MS should pay a bit of attention to is about being strategic with your information seeking, strategic with building a team. I think Fiona might have already spoken about how important it is to build a really good team and some self-management strategies around doing that. But this is, we're living, I don't know so much about the New Zealand health system. It feels like our health system here in Australia is just under continuing and greater pressure from every aspect. COVID did not do us any favors. I'm sure it was the same for you, but, it's very, very hard to get timely appointments at the moment, and it's exceptionally difficult to have health professionals talking to each other. I think that's probably one of the biggest hurdles for people with chronic health conditions at the moment that I'm seeing in Australia, is feeling quite isolated because maybe a specialist isn't talking to a GP, or somebody's advice is conflicting with somebody else's advice. So it makes the importance of self-management really come to the surface for us in realizing that we have to be across all of it. And it's important for us to go into our sessions with neurologists or GPs with our questions, and having thought through a little bit of an agenda, maybe. What do we need to get from them? How can we ask them for good opinions and advice? And really being very proactive in the management of our healthcare. It's an important one. I always ask people with MS, particularly newly diagnosed, to think about the health and wellness framework that they want to live within. And I'm not going to go through all of these because education, but they're all important. Education, exercise, nutrition, and sleep. They're the boring ones, don't you think? The diet, the exercise, the sleep, like it's the constant. I know. We've heard it all before, but take this opportunity now to really listen. I think Fiona might have talked about this as well, but some of these aspects have been covered today. Take the opportunity to go home and think, okay, what can I change to up the level of self-care? Because all of these strategies could use your attention. Medication and symptom management, brilliant. This should definitely be a part of your MS journey. It's the first time I've used that word, the journey. And I hope that you all have great MS nurses and neurologists and other health professionals in there giving you all of the options, or at least discussing the ones that are right for you with you. Looking at employment and practical strategies around living well now that you have a chronic health condition. And the three ones at the end I've put in bold because they're the ones I most commonly talk about. The stress management that we've touched on. Psychological, emotional, and social support is so important. And also spirituality and finding meaning. These ones are important. The finding meaning one is big with people with chronic health conditions because it's often challenged. It's that autonomy. It's often challenged of even the basic example. You've got a family coming over to your house for dinner. Everybody has a lovely dinner, and then you're told, you sit there, you don't have to do the dishes. You've got MS, we'll do things for you. Can sound so nice to begin with, but actually from the person with MS perspective, that can really get pretty annoying pretty quickly. I want to do my own dishes. Thanks. Like, stop speaking to me like this. These are things that I want to do. These things give my life meaning. Don't just tell me to sit on the couch all day. I want to be up. I want to be contributing. I want to be adding value. All of these things. They're tricky ones to navigate, but they require our attention. I love people to enter the world of chronic health management with realistic optimism. So I really encourage people to be optimists rather than pessimists, but realistic optimists. I encourage people to have a think about their self-talk, because sometimes after a diagnosis of MS, people can understandably get a bit stuck in a loop of, oh my gosh, my life is never going to be easy now. My life is over. This is all doomsday stuff. This is terrible. And it's okay to have a moment there, but we certainly don't want to sit there for the rest of our lives, because that's not an enjoyable place to reside. I also caution people, though, on going the polar opposite, because it can work for you for a couple of years. I'm going to beat this. I'm not going to let MS bring me down. I'm going to control it. And I hear a lot of people say this as well. And that can work really, really well for the first few years, the first however long. It could be first few decades. It could just be the first few months. It can work beautifully to help people lift themselves into great disease management strategies. I'm going to eat the right food. I'm going to go to the gym every day. I'm going to get 9 hours sleep. I'm going to have healthy boundaries. I'm going to see a psychologist. I'm going to engage all of the health professionals. I'm going to work on my muscles. Use some of these. Yep. We all use some of, sorry, I just heard something in my ears from Zoom. Procrastination, not having a break. You know, when you think, I've just got to keep on going, and if I get through it, I just won't have a break. I'm going to just smash this out until. It is a coping strategy. It'll get stuff done, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's a healthy one. Becoming withdrawn or avoiding social connections or avoidance more generally. These are coping strategies for us when we're having tough times, but they're not particularly helpful. So I want your focus to be on that top section of this slide, positive adaptive coping strategies. And this is something, as people newly diagnosed with MS, you just want to have a quick check-in with yourself. Which coping strategies have I been using since diagnosis? Because it is normal to use some of the more escapism type strategies. It's normal. Maybe you had a week or so on the couch watching Netflix. Maybe you drank a few more glasses of wine. Maybe you spent some time off work just sitting in a puddle of tears. These are all things that are understandable, but they're certainly not coping strategies that we would want to encourage you to do for the rest of your days. We would want to see a shift from those coping strategies to ones that are more proactive and ones that will help you to find a good spot to rest in management of your chronic health condition. We'll talk more about them. Key components of mental health. This is like really dry words. You know, we all hear about emotional and psychological, social and physical well-being, but they're really important. So I'm hoping that you'll be able to, that these will resonate with you and you'll think about yourself in these 4 separate components as we talk about it. So we talk about emotional well-being and we often think, oh, that's somebody's happiness level. Is that person happy or not? And you go to your doctor and your doctor will say, how have you been? How are you feeling? And you'll say, good. Or you'll say, oh, not so great. And that's like a quick assessment on emotional well-being. And that's what happens in reality, but actually it's a lot more than just whether you're feeling happy today or not. We can also see emotional well-being reflected in your levels of interest in things. Are you interested in your normal day-to-day activities? Are you interested in engaging with your family or with friends? Are you interested in working? These all come together with your emotions around happiness, etc., to have a look at your emotional well-being. Emotional well-being is also about being able to recognize, express, and modulate your emotions. So if you're experiencing something that's challenging and is a little bit sad, are you able to express that sadness? That's an indicator of emotional well-being. If you're in a situation that's really anger-provoking, that's really making you frustrated, are you able to express those emotions in an appropriate way? That's good emotional well-being. So have a little look around in your life for those areas, and are you expressing your emotions in a healthy manner? You know, we have great examples where people express emotions in unhealthy ways, but have a look at you. Are you bottling everything up? Or are you able to have a little cry if something's sad? Are you able to laugh appropriately at something that's really funny, even if you're challenged by something else? These are good measures of your emotional well-being. Psychological well-being, if I can get that up, is about how are you functioning in this world? Are you functioning effectively? Are you able to do all that you need to do? That's, you know, appropriate requests, obviously. Are you able to manage your stress well? And psychological well-being also taps into what we were talking about before, that purpose and meaning. Do you have a level of autonomy and self-acceptance? How do you feel about yourself? Can you back yourself? Can you say the one theme or the one statement that I would love everybody that I work with to be able to leave sessions with me with this statement is, no matter what happens, I will be okay. And that's a massive statement, right? If I think about it in my own life, if I was to be able to say, no matter what happens, I will be okay, and can apply that to every part of my life, I'm feeling pretty psychologically robust. You know, I know, bring it. bring that challenge, I can do it. And that's what we aim for. We aim for people to feel like whatever happens, they're going to back themselves and they'll be all right. Even if it's hard, they'll still be all right. Social well-being, you know this one. It's about being engaged in healthy, supportive, and nurturing relationships. So it's very important, social well-being. It's important to be engaged in relationships where you love the people in your life and they love you too and show you that level of love and respect. So some of this work is sometimes about looking at relationships. Have we got any toxic relationships going on? It's a very big buzzword at the moment. How can we minimize harm of others on us? How can we set up boundaries? How can we ask for help? All of these things around social well-being. It's important to have a sense of belonging, a sense of community, and social well-being extends to this concept of, do I feel like I bring value to others? It's a really big, interesting, important part when we look at people who are aging. We need to make sure that part of their reality is offering benefit to others, bringing value, having something to contribute. It's really important for us as human beings to feel like we're contributing. And physical well-being, I shouldn't look at it like it's the boring one, but it's all about the physical fitness. Remember that mental and physical fitness are intertwined, and physical health. So they're both really impacted by sleep, diet, and exercise. We can't say it enough, sleep, diet, exercise. They're so important, sleep, diet, exercise. But I know people turn off. They start yawning. Let's see if my slide, oh, there we go. Attending to these components is called self-care. So my next slide is completely overwhelming, and I realize it is. But if you get copies of these slides, you might be able to just look at them like one by one. These are examples of strategies that you could use in your life to up your physical, emotional, psychological, or social well-being. So if you're thinking, I'm just going to pick one. Top right corner, practice gratitude and kindness. If I was in the room, I would say, put your hand up if you have done a gratitude journal before, or if you're used to this concept. You don't have to, but you can discuss it later in the car on the way home. Gratitude journaling is a great strategy as one of your blocks of the fortress of habit that you can slowly introduce into your life. 3 things that you're grateful for every day before you go to bed, or 3 things that made you laugh, or 3 things that make you happy. If you do that every day, that's exercising your psychological well-being muscle to just remind yourself of what you're grateful for. And so there are different colors for different things. Mindfulness is there. Self-talk, we've talked a little bit about around emotional health and well-being. How are you talking to yourself about MS? How are you talking to yourself generally? It's a fascinating study, honestly. If you remember, that's a hard thing. If you remember tomorrow morning, as soon as you wake up, Sunday morning, what does your mind tell you first? What's the first thing that your mind presents you with? Is it, oh, I get to lie here and sleep in. This is my sleep-in day. This is the best. Is it, oh my gosh, I've got to remember to go to the shops and get this, this, this. Is it, oh my gosh, that meeting tomorrow, I'm going to die. Like what is your mind presenting you with as soon as you wake up? It's a very interesting study, and I hope you do it tomorrow just to see. And then you've learned something about yourself. Oh, as soon as I wake up, my mind is highlighting something really positive about my day. Or most commonly, as soon as I wake up, my mind wants to slam me straight into the stress of what I should be doing today and what's going to be difficult. And you'll be pleased to know that you can actually change that about yourself. You can practice and teach yourself how to change that self-talk so it's more helpful. Anyway, I could talk all about all of these things, but I won't. But there's certainly things that you can discuss with health professionals, psychologists, counsellors, others. A quick couple of slides on mental illness. We're almost finished, so that's good. We haven't been too far off track. Mental illness is a diagnosable condition that can affect thinking, feeling, mood, or behaviour, or a combination, of course. It's around having a complex mental health challenge over a sustained period of time. And you will know these titles: major depressive disorder, we often just call that clinical depression; generalized anxiety disorder, there's lots of panic, social anxiety, lots of phobia-related disorders in there. These are all diagnosable conditions. The point that I want to make today really is, I want you to understand that it's entirely fine to have a bad day or several bad days, particularly in these early days of diagnosis, you can experience symptoms of depression, like being really quick to cry or feeling like you don't want to get up or not having any motivation to do anything or feeling really flat. You can have symptoms of depression in response to what's going on in your world without being diagnosed with clinical depression. Because we're human beings and we're designed to feel emotions, and it's appropriate for you to have emotions when you're going through something hard. You can have a day where you really worry about everything, and that might be a few days. And I want to reassure you that that doesn't mean that there's a diagnosis of anxiety around the corner, but rather for you to have some self-compassion and exhibit some self-care and tell yourself, this is okay, I'm going through a hard time and this will pass. Because that's often what happens. But of course, as a psychologist, I also want to say, I don't want you to wait to ask for support. So many people say, well, I'm not mentally ill, so I don't need to see a psychologist. You know, I'm not that depressed yet. I have so many people that come back and see me and they come back too late. They wait and wait and wait and wait. And then they call me from their darkened bedroom in the corner. And I say, why didn't you call me when you first started feeling these symptoms again? I didn't want to be depressed, so I didn't want to call you. I didn't want to acknowledge it. So I guess it's that fine line of being conscious of how you're feeling and the emotions that are happening for you and being able to say, that's okay, that's normal. We all go through ups and downs, but also don't be backwards in coming forwards to ask for help, because you don't actually have to be diagnosed as clinically depressed to get that help. You can start talking to a psychologist or a counsellor and get into some preventative measures to stop it from getting worse. I guess my last few slides are just around some things that might have already been brought to your attention. Forgive me if you've already said this, Nicola, but the University of Tasmania run a fantastic online course. It's a free online course. It's a MOOC. They call it a MOOC, which is a massive open online course. But it's called Understanding MS. It's open for its next round, and it is done, I think, beautifully. So there are the details there. I think you can't enroll until the 9th of September. I think that's what that means. It goes for 6 weeks. It's 2 hours a week. You get flooded with information, but it's in a really lovely format. And it's information about just understanding MS from everybody, from the person with MS perspective, from the researcher perspective, from the health professional perspective. And I thoroughly recommend it. There is a course that I have developed that some of you might be interested in. It really goes much more into detail about those 4 issues that I think are really important at the time of diagnosis, around self-identity, around managing your own health condition, about stress management, and also about communicating with the people that you love and how important that is to get it right straight away. And that is 4 modules. It's much less than the Tasmanian MOOC, and it's just me. It's not a whole team of people, but that's one that you could be interested in. You're welcome to look it up. And I also wanted to let you know that I'm doing a podcast with, I hope that's okay, Nicola, that I say that, with my colleague Siona, who is also somebody that lives with MS, and that's actually just come online. We designed it with the aim to be really educational and informative, but really the main point of this podcast is to be a little bit entertaining. But it's 2 psychologists who live with MS talking about working for so many years with other people with MS and the themes that we hear from them, and maybe some psychological strategies kind of woven through that to help you think about better ways to manage a chronic health condition. So what can you do from here? I just really want everybody to be proactive in your own optimistic realism. And it might take a little while. Some of you might have only been diagnosed a couple of months ago. So some of this might just sound a little bit too rosy and a little bit too kind of, all right, let's get off we'll all be fine, happy clappy. But I believe that when things settle after about 12 months is the first, it's really hard to get your head anywhere else but MS for the first 12 months. But after 12 months, you've got 12 months of data, and you can look back and say, how did I go through that time? And where can I step now? And what will be good for me as a next move in effectively managing this condition? Choose a couple of strategies, whether it's gratitude journal, whether it's goal setting, whether it's just attending to your physical health and well-being, or your diet, sleep. I love that one, that we can always say to people with MS, if you feel like you're doing nothing to help yourself, sleep more, try, set some boundaries so that you can sleep more, because we are all really busy, and I get that. Examining your coping strategies is a good place to start. Get some support, particularly if you feel like you're struggling psychologically or emotionally. Reach out to people. You really don't have to be at desperate level to say to a psychologist, hey, can I chat through a few things? I've been recently diagnosed with a chronic health condition, and I wouldn't mind just talking out a bit of my self-identity stuff or a little bit of my grief. You know, why do I feel really different when nothing much has changed? Talk about it. And even just tap into a psychologist so that down the track, if you want to speak to someone, you know who to go to. That's always a good strategy. I think that might be it. Let's see the next slide. There we go. That's just me. If you have any questions, because I've realized that I've run us right up to time, Nicola, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to email me, and I am more than happy to converse with you on email. I might stop sharing, Nicola. Would that be okay?
You stop sharing your slides?
Yeah, I might stop sharing those.
It'd be great.
There we go.
Sally, thank you so much. It's an incredible presentation. I really liked that you acknowledged overwhelm. I also will be waking up tomorrow and checking on myself as to, I've never kind of considered that before. I think it's really interesting. So I'll be thinking about that. And I also really liked that mantra, no matter what happens, I will be okay.
Yeah. Yeah, but it takes a lot of work. We have to work every day to build up all of our little blocks of resilience so that when we are hit by a challenge, which might take out a couple of those blocks. So the blocks might be physical exercise, or they might be catching up with friends, or they might be gratitude journal, or they might be getting a good night's sleep. And if we have lots and lots of blocks and we have a challenge that really, knocks out a couple of blocks, like, so maybe we can't physically exercise for a couple of weeks. If something really catastrophic happens with the MS, then all of our other blocks are still in place. And we can say, no matter what happens, I'm still going to be okay, because I've still got that phone call with my friend every Tuesday, or I've still got, something to look forward to. Yeah, sorry.
Right, and just kind of circling back to the mental health, just a note, our community advisors are there. If you want to be looped into any local services, then please do reach out to them. Now, does anybody have any questions for Sally? I can walk around with the microphone if there are any questions or comments.
Really gets me seeing myself. How discreet it can be as far as diagnosis. From not internally yourself, but others.
Did you hear that?
I didn't. I'm sorry.
It's just about how discreet MS can be in terms of yourself and others. Do you want to elaborate on that?
I can't hear you, Nicola. I think you said how something MS can be with yourself or others.
So my question, sorry, my question is in relation to, of all diagnoses, potentially, I would consider MS as the most discreet. Is it a case of not worrying about what anyone else thinks, or more of a case of not worrying about what you think?
Right. I'm really sorry to say that I missed a lot of that. I think you actually, Nicola, I think you need to be in front of the computer if the computer microphone is here. So if it's in the room, I'm not hearing it. But I think you were saying, should we be concerned about what other people think or what we think? I can't hear you, Nicola. Oh, there you are.
MS being discreet and perhaps the most discreet diagnosis. So do we worry about what others think, or do we just worry about what we think ourselves?
Right. Should we worry about what other people think, or just concentrate on what we're thinking? I'm sorry, I missed the first bit, but you know what? It's a great question if it's covering the things that I think it's covering. It's such a great question, because right back at the very start of my presentation, I thought that I would find a great brochure to tell people how to cope, and that would be like a one size fits all. It doesn't. So I'm a huge, as you can imagine, a huge fan of talking to everybody about MS and how it's affecting me and what they need to know about it and how we can work together. That's not everybody's coping style though. So I work with a couple of people with MS who do not tell their family members, their close family, their children do not know they have MS. That is not my way, but that is their way. So I work with them to find comfort in that and to be able to navigate that, which is more tricky for me because it's not the way I would do it. I think for most people, so I'll go general, I think for most people it's a combination of both. It's about viewing those two things separately. What is comfortable for you? And how do you want to live your life? How do you want to present this to the world and being okay with that? But also setting up some strategies around how you communicate it with others. And mostly I find that having some key messages that you want to impart to others before you engage them in that conversation is important. What do I want this person to know in this conversation? X, Y, and Z. Okay, here I go. I'm going to go in. And I'm going to recognize that whatever they say back to it is not about me, it's about them. So the example, lots of people diagnosed with MS tell some friends and family, and some people go, oh yeah, you know, sure, what are we going to have for lunch? And they're kind of a bit dismissive. And some people are like, oh my gosh, that's the worst thing ever. And they're in tears. Oh, how are you going to cope? This is awful. And the person with MS is like, wow, like that's not making me feel particularly supportive or happy. And what we all have to realize is that the way people respond to us tells us about them and how they're processing the information. It's not a reflection on us. And that's a big one. And we can use it to our advantage when we realize that they're having things going on in their head about if that was them, how would they respond? Or the first example I gave where somebody's really dismissive, maybe they know somebody with MS in their life. And they don't think it's a big deal. So you might be thinking it's a massive deal to share this diagnosis, and they're like, oh yeah, it's not going to affect you. What's the problem? And that can be hard to reconcile as well. Nicola, did I get anywhere close to what the question was?
Okay, yeah, very well answered. Any other questions? Yeah. Okay, I think you'll need to come up here, yeah.
Oh yeah, and come right where I can see you. I think the microphone will get you. Yeah. Hi. Oh, it's nice to see someone.
Thank you for that lovely speech. I just want to know, most of us are working, and how do we, like how that it's easy to have that A-team, but you also want it. I just want to know, how would you help us get like that kind of balance in a work environment, sort of a way? Because like you said, it could be hard and people react to it differently. So it's just for us to, like for me, particularly, I would want to maintain a very normal kind of life, and reactions like that may or may not, kind of help the situation in a way.
Yeah, that's right.
Just a question, and just a way that that could help with the whole work environment, or just have a good balance in life in general.
Yes, great question. Are you talking also about disclosing to your employer, or just generally living with MS and working?
Both in a way.
Both, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just I think a point that I would like to make, thank you for that question, a point that I'd like to make about disclosing your diagnosis to an employer. If you're doing it at the time of diagnosis, then that's one aspect, and that's a different way. Sometimes people are in hospital for a few weeks, they need to tell their employer something, and so it all comes out and you don't get a lot of time to shape the messaging. If you've had MS for a while, you haven't told the employer yet, one of the strategies I suggest is that you have a meeting with whoever it is that's appropriate, and you let them know, and this can actually extend to not just employers but other people in your life, let them know that it's not news to you. So it's not like, oh, I need to tell you something, I was diagnosed with MS yesterday and this is a crisis situation, I need a crisis response from you. If you want to just kind of weave this into your employer's knowledge, then you might be able to just say, I just wanted to let you know about a health condition that I live with. I've been living with it for a while. It's not news to me, but I really did want to let you know about it in case it comes up in the future and I might need some adaptations to work or something to change. It's about kind of bringing it up with them in a non-scary crisis type of way. However, every workplace is different. And so I would be remiss to give advice to anybody to, you know, go and tell everybody at work without knowing your own individual situation. So that's an important thing. And I think the MS Society or MS Auckland can help you with that and can talk to you about ways to approach employers, the things you'd need to think about before you tell them, what you might want to tell them for. Key messages are always important. Why do you want to tell them? What do you need from them after you've told them? And in that meeting, in that conversation, can you help guide them to that? You know, we've heard great examples of people that have told their employer and their employer has turned the place upside down to make it more suitable and accessible and fabulous. But of course, for every great story, we hear bad stories as well. So we want to make sure that you're going in knowing exactly the messages you want to send and what you expect of your employer, because a lot of managers will say, what do you want me to do about this? And they'll put it back on you, which is good, but you want to have your strategies ready to go. Work-life balance is, you know, I love your question because you're saying, I want to just continue to have the life that everybody thought we were going to have, which is just working and being productive and being successful, and off I go. But I'm also aware that I've got to be strategic and I've got MS. So what am I going to do in terms of having this balance? It's an individual game. It's really up to you. But I would start objectively. You know, sit back, have a cup of tea, have a think about what's good for this body, because this body is now facing challenges that the body next to you doesn't face. So do I need to have slightly reduced hours? Often people, particularly in today's modern time, are choosing 4-day-a-week jobs, which can be really, really helpful for people managing chronic health conditions. But it's such an individual thing. So I wouldn't want to give you advice around the number of hours you should be working, but rather set up good strategies, good boundaries from the get-go. Yeah. I feel like that's quite a fluffy answer, but it is very individual.
Great answer, Sally. Thank you so much.